A competition.
So, and has everybody got that active-passive relationship worked out on the counter-revolving tree? It's going to get important.
No, not the revolving, counter-revolving tree. Haven't managed to suss that out entirely. Although we had a good attempt at the tower.
Okay. The tower, if you're reading someone's cards, it could very well be the most negative card in the deck. The same with the moon, Sadi or Mem. But that's not a... You have to remember that the cards, if you're not reading for someone, particularly you, Philippa, the cards represent a concept. Well, that concept of getting thrown off the tower includes the concept of you winning, that sort of nature type concept where you throw the aggressor off the tower. You see what I mean? You do not have to be the one thrown off. So you have this entire concept. Every one of the major arcana, that's how they work. So that's what they went through. It's like and if you deal with that in a pure Hermetic point, you take it back down into the shin, and so all of a sudden you see shin is the traveler. Shin is the one that goes out, that Dallas, shoot a thing, and that's how it achieved finally the recognition that the only way it's going to get the balls to jump off the cliff is to go in the forest and throw the rocks and stones it's picked up at the big animal. So it becomes more frightened. But when it's in the tower is much more gentle. It's actually the most gentlest of this concept of balance and ego, of creating that situation where if you recognize something in self that's interfering with your spiritual path, or like in Adam and Eve, their communion, now that they're separating more and more, they still want to maintain the communion, see? And the tower gives them the ability, in that particular case, and that particular travel from heart to nature there on that tower thing, it gives them the ability to throw off the things that interfere with their communion. See, if they're separating, They're essentially started at Malkuth. The separation is getting larger and larger, even though they're enjoying each other communally on a physical level. While they're doing that, it actually enhances the higher self separation. You see, while they were both the same higher self, and now they do still share a spirit body. That's why I wanted people to go back to the tree, counter-revolving tree, because that sharing of the spirit body, and it goes this way. And if you're a married couple, you understand what I mean. Terry, you've been married. It's a relationship goes like that, and then like that, and then like that, and then like that. You know, that's what it's supposed to do. That's part and parcel of the growth of the soul.
So is that why Mooney describes it as a spring under tension?
Yes. And so it goes, or it's just as easy to use the rubber bands. You go like this, and like that. It's just, that's what the counter-revolving tree. It's like, twice a year, you're right across from each other.
Remember I was telling you about that during the week. I
Yeah.
seen the videos about 10 days ago, and I spoke to Carl about how there's the 2 points each year.
But even when you're 180 apart, that's an even better balance point from the point of both little cells. That's actually a better balance point than when hot and nectar, or if you prefer chakmabina, are, right, here. See, because sometimes the conflict, and this is what I'm talking about with the tower, when it's here, when it's just right up against each other, the conflict seems more intense because you don't have that millisecond to separate the individual emotional bodies. You see, because the emotional bodies themselves are blended. So when you're at the 180, you see, when on the counter-revolving tree, when you have hot right next to each other, which would be Philippa, and then Carl has nectar right next to each other, which would be Carl. You see, just far apart where the spirit bodies are still totally involved, but the emotional bodies have this small separation between them, so you can have your own emotion without interference. Now, there's nothing wrong with interference once the entire process is complete, but the most tension when a couple is trying to blend a spirit path, the most tension takes place when their spheres are closest together. During the rest of the cycle, as the spheres achieve diagonal, this is where we deal with the true concept of refraction. See, reflection's easy. Reflection is very easy. Reflection, you have on a red bedpan. He's got on a blue-gray bedpan. It's easy. They reflect. But refraction disseminates. You have one ray of light in the prism, and yet you get all 7 colors out of it, depending on where you are in relationship to the refractive index. You see? So the difficult times, and it's not very difficult when they're only 15 to 20 degrees apart, away from self, because then they're in opposition, but the closer they come together, so let's just say you have a red purple, that's pretty easy to deal with. It's like, oh, I feel red. I'm in my red space. I'm in my material space. I'm in and the other person's in the intellectual space. So it's real easy to look at your partner and go, okay, well, you take care of the material things and I'll deal with the other things. And you go through that. But once you get in, to that blue-yellow space, power and expression, so to speak, that's the conflicting place in this binary of a relationship, whether it's the relationship between a couple or a relationship between self-self. That's where the conflict part exists before you're both at Tiphareth, before you're both green. Then you get this very, very nice place at the 90-degree point. That's a very nice place because everything's balanced. That's that funny time that happens a couple of times a year when it's very difficult to make a decision because you're automatically going, oh, honey, that's okay, you decide. See, those things only happen a couple of times a year. But it's like, you know, that's that time. I mean, you remember times like that. Everybody does. I mean, it happens to Aggie and I. And all of a sudden, everything's like, woo, this is nice. You know, I'm happy with everything she does. She's happy with whatever. I mean, what a nice place. You know, but that's part of the process. That's why this counter-revolving thing is so important to understand, because as self, once we get into the Tiphareth thing, I mean, we're actually going to spend, you realize we're going to be coming to Tiphareth 8 times in this process. We're going to be balancing each one of them as they come. So as an individual takes control of self, I'm talking little self, they can actually mess with the speed of the internal tree, of the inside. The outside one is constant. The outside one is enclosed in the hole. But you actually start taking control of that inside tree. You actually have control of the active, passive aspects of self. That's the Hermetic process. That's the Kabbalistic process. So once you achieve control of that little self,
so then you would experience the polarities of so much of pleasurable times versus angst times.
You would deliberately create them in order to control the situation. You see, that's what realization is.
Why wouldn't you choose to stay in balance? Why would you choose to create a polarity?
We're talking about a relationship. I'm using human relationships like Adam and Eve, like I'm using on the tree and stuff. And today I'm using the relationship a couple has together is an example. If at some point Aggie is mad at me, it doesn't happen very often. I wish it would happen more often, because she turns around and she thinks I'm some type of guru type son of a bitch. And as a result of that, she holds back and holds back and holds back. And then when she goes off, she really goes off. You see? So all of a sudden, she's way over there. Well, if I'm not exactly across from her, well, God forbid, I'm right up next to her. You see? And then I react too. The ability to move in opposition to that.
Okay, I got you. Yeah.
Stops the reaction. You move that inside tree. It's like, oh boy, the old lady's pissed off today. You don't turn around and lie to yourself and say, oh, well, I guess I just got to appease it, because all that does is enhances the separation between self and self. Mm-hmm. What it does is says, oh, I got to move over here. And
go to the pub.
That means you have to surrender to her angst. It's a process. That's the beauty. That's the beauty that Adam and Eve are going through. They're learning how to surrender. If all of a sudden Eve demands this, Adam is learning how to say, okay, because they're both totally aware of the fact that just last a short period of time. You've got one going this way, you've got another one going that way, and that's just a momentary influence. The concept of growth is the concept of the whole. The dichotomous aspect of reality has to be recognized in order to be able to control self in relationship to it. That's the difference between outrageous impulse and controlled impulse. I mean, if every time a couple had an argument, which happens most when it's, in direct, when they're right together, when hard and nature are right like that, or Deborah and Angela, chocolate dinner, when they're right up against the inside and outside, right up against each other like that, those are the most tenuous times. Those are the times when arguments are, when you've got both sides arguing, because the emotional body is like this. So one of the things we do in this process of climbing this tree is we're trying to shrink that emotional body. But by shrinking it, we in no way deal with the concept that we're doing away with emotion. You have to have emotion to live. Emotion is very, very important, very positive. But the ability to recognize emotion itself. So as we develop that ability and develop our responsive control to that ability, that's what shrinks the emotional body, because while we're emoting, we suddenly are aware that we're emoting. Serious emotion, when someone's really angry, they're not aware of it. I mean, they actually think they're right. See, so that's what we're trying to do, decrease the intensity of emotion. And then, so it's the same thing. You're trying to decrease the intensity of fear of surrender to higher self. And that's the best place to talk higher self into being not afraid of you, too. See, from a human perspective, you have to look at higher self as a self. I mean, until you're totally one, it emotes too. It emotes. Higher self does emote. I mean, higher self gets really pissed off at you if you don't do the job, and it gives you a fucking toothache or a bellyache or diarrhea. I had a good one this morning, one of the other magicians, a lady, so priestess, down in South America was, we got this rotating ship we do, and her little 6-7-year-old son, had diarrhea really bad. He picked up some kind of flu, cold type thing, tick thing. And he's very uncomfortable. He had to keep running to the bathroom. And he was young enough that his mom was concerned, wanted to make sure there wasn't a serious problem, like, salmonella or E. coli or something like that causing it. So she was always in the bathroom with him. And he said, Ma. She said, what, honey? And he says, I need some Viagra. And his mother says, my God, son, what do you need Viagra for? And he said, Ma, isn't that what you give Daddy when you want him to get hard? So I thought that one was pretty good. That's my joke of the day. Okay, you understand this concept of what they're going through when they're going through the tower? See, they're learning how to, or agreeing try and control that inside tree in relationship to the outside tree. But both of them, now you have to, this is where it gets difficult. That's why I wanted everyone to do their best to check that out. You see, they're both individual inside trees. See, that inside tree is a little self, so we've got two little selves, so there's two inside trees. The outside tree is the whole. So you see, it gets a little complex. I mean, we're not dealing with a three-dimensional reality. We're dealing with an etheric principle.
Question.
Go ahead.
So does that mean when it's a couple, your two little selves are interacting, but there's only one?
Correct. You got it. You got it. That's the Trinity. That's the concept. We'll be getting into that about 6 or 7 steps down the road. Yeah, Eve is a self. Adam is a self. But they're both little selves. That counter-revolving tree, they're both in the same place there, still. But as they continue this progress of identity, of self-identity, it actually tears on that higher self a little bit. As they become more and more separate, higher self starts, look at it more like an egg. It starts almost separating into two higher self, even though it's still the same higher self. Sometimes, Eve's higher self may say, I want you to do this. And Adam's higher self says, I want you to do this. They're the same but separate. Back in the old days, thousands of years ago, when people were trying to discuss, and you have to remember very few people read or wrote, and even the ones that did had an extremely limited education. Very few people actually got to go to school or stuff like that. I mean, maybe mom or dad was one of the fortunate ones that learned to read and write, so they would teach their children. But it was a very slow process because individuals had to work so hard just to survive. And that's why they had rabbis and sadhus, imams, because they basically got paid just to sit there and study so they could advise. So it gets very complex.
Now, did you say Adam and Eve had the same higher self?
At the present time, they are not yet separated.
All right, so...
When you get right down to the nitty-gritty, the entire yellow spirit body, or the blue or the green, have the same higher self. Those are the three that make up the Trinity that will eventually bond.
I don't understand that, because my higher self would tell me to do something differently than your higher self would tell you to do.
Sure.
So how are they the same?
They're the same because, just like I did with that little round table on the fulcrum there, they're the same because they want your little self to react properly to the whole to keep that whole table balanced. You start off on a seesaw, but all of a sudden as this board gets broader and broader, you're allowing more and more consciousness onto that board. And you have to keep that whole thing flat. And the less of this you have, the more stable your reality becomes. Now, so, we have this pregnant entity who she's not even aware of the fact yet. She's never had a period before. So she don't know she's not having one. She knows she's feeling different. But there's nothing kicking yet. You know what I mean? She's not, aware of something inside of her. Even though it's spiritually manifest, they're so totally wrapped up in self, both Adam's self and Eve's self, that they're still in the experiential thing. They went from 1 to 2 to desire and back and said, oh, the world is different because we want. You know, yes, it was the want. Once they got back to Malkuth, before they started their journey we're on now, once they got back there, all of a sudden they had needs. The hell of a difference between a want and a need. You know, they wanted to experiment sexually, but they still didn't need food or a bathroom. Once they got back to what they expected to be eaten, they needed to eat. Do you understand what I'm saying? In other words, it became a need. Now, during this procreative process, Eve's needs are going to become quite different than Adam's. They're going to become quite different. Eve is going to need different things than Adam. They haven't experienced this yet. You see? And they're going to go off kilter a little bit. Then they're going to come back on kilter and learn how to control the inside tree in relationship to the whole. And suddenly there'll be 3 of them. It's really not that difficult. It isn't. Now look. Do it in direct relationship to your relationship itself, like I was describing at the beginning. I mean, you recognize them little changes that happen all the time in any relationship, you know? And, okay, so that's all. The same thing happens in the etheric plane. And learning how to control that inside space, the little I self, allows one to move that thing like this. The only thing is, you can't make the counter-revolving one go the wrong way. You can't go backwards. It always has to move in the same direction. But you can move it much more rapidly. You can move that inside one much more rapidly to any place you want. You own that inside. That inside one is you. You own it. You own that. You can move that at will. That's why we talk about right use of will. That's why we talk about learning how to manifest will. So all you have to do is will a comfortable aspect and you achieve it just that fast. That's the magic part. Right use of will. And will is self. Will is the power of self. And if you will to express higher self, you can do that. But you can't stop the outside tree. But you can move the inside tree the way you want it in relationship to the outside tree. One of the problems minor adepts have is they start experiencing that will, and so you got these trees counter-revolving, and they want to go immediately to the closest point they can get, which is a mistake because that point never lasts very long. You should go to just before that point and experience the whole development and then slow decline, but it stays very pleasant for that long period of time. But if you just go right to the center, all you get is the fine.
Could you give an example? Give me an example of what you're talking about.
Give me an example. Addie screams at me. She does that. So, in order to deal with that, if I went just to the point where I was perfectly comfortable with her screaming at me and capable of absorbing all of that, all I would achieve is the slow release from that. I'd constantly move away from it, and she'd constantly move into this other place. And then suddenly we start developing angst and guilt in relationship to each other and stuff like this. Instead of that, if I go to a given period of time, and a given period within the time span of a relationship or emotional relationship, and went to before her angst began, okay, and allowed myself to experience and understand the angst as it was happening, as it was developing. Knowing it was going to come. I can't change that. I'm not allowed to experience that. Knowing it was coming. And I'd get there to the angst and I'd watch it slowly diminish. Much more effective, much more pleasant, and much longer lasting and elucidating.
I'm sorry, I still didn't friggin' get what you said.
Are you saying John and you never had an argument?
No, of course we did, but I'm not understanding what you're saying and about just how is.
I'll try again.
Understanding the difference of the pleasantness of the responses.
Okay. So we're assuming at this point you have total ability to control little self. That's the little tree. So John gets angry. Instead of moving your stadio relationship to the point of acceptance,
okay.
if you move
I'm going to yell at you any minute.
You're going to what?
I'm going to start yelling at you any minute.
Because of your lack of understanding?
I just think whatever you're saying.
Because of your lack of understanding?
I think it's your lack of explaining.
My lack of explaining. Okay, see? There's the conflict. You don't understand, so it's my fucking fault.
I'm not
okay?
understanding.
So wait a minute. See, you can't listen while you're fucking thinking. If you're still in the process of combating the explanation, you will never achieve understanding. You got it now?
Mm-hmm.
So the process is to be able to move to a place before lack of understanding. And watch the process again with itself. And when this happens on both sides, the conflict still takes place. But you're watching it develop. Now you're on a path. See? But you're watching it develop. And that's what I'm talking about with the minor attacks. They go, oh, well, now I know how it works. I don't have to pay any more attention to it. That's bullshit. It don't work like that. You got to watch it develop and go through it. That's growth. So you understand it. Next time it starts, you can turn around and look at your partner and go like, man, we went through this a month or so ago. It's a different situation, but it's the same emotion.
Okay. So the difference is you are observing it without judging it. You're just...
no judgment. What a wonderful thing.
Okay, got it.
It seems to remove emotion. It seems to shrink emotion.
All right, why didn't you just say that? To begin with.
I was fucking with you when your emotional body shrunk down when you finally jumped off the cliff. I was standing right fucking next to you. So what do you mean, why didn't I just say it?
I mean, backing up a few minutes ago.
Oh, okay.
Nice.
So, how do we deal with a situation when emotion, as that inside tree is going around and the outside tree is going around like that. If you picture the intelligences or the spheres on the tree, actually they're called intelligences. It's like there's 10 aspects to intelligence. They're called intelligence. Picture them as little crystal globes that are faceted. See, so there's prisms coming out. See, so this one over here, and you got this one over here, and they're going to relate to each other. See? Now, so they're going to be passing through that whole spectrum of light. As they're doing that, as they near each other, get away from each other. Well, one way to look at it as they get close enough together. See, suddenly they both got all the light from the other. That's why I'm saying when they're closest together is when there's the most tension. Because the emotional bodies, which are totally individual, I don't care how close anyone is, there may be exceptions. There's exceptions to every rule. But if the emotional bodies are that wrapped up in each other, you've got two individual selves. And that's the tensest part in community. So by shrinking the emotional bodies, then you're that close together, but you don't allow the emotions to create conflict. When they're interwoven is when they conflict. That's why Tantra is such a good exercise. Because you're trying to reach the same emotional point. Tantra is like a sexual meditation. But, and even in meditation, unless you're both meditating on the same thing, there's still going to be emotional conflict, and they're not going to match. Philippa may be worried because Fox has got a cold, and Carl may say, shit, I got to fix the goddamn car so I can drive to work tomorrow. I ain't got time to deal with a freaking kid. And, you understand what I'm saying. I mean, no matter how you deal with it, you've got these two individual actions. So by getting that emotional thing, the same emotion, but less flaring, Philippa goes, well, I'm a little worried about Fox. And Carl goes, you think he can come outside and help me change the tire, and I'll talk to him a little bit and get his head off it? You see, you're doing the same thing. Because you both love Fox. But instead of expanding his emotions to where they come because he's worried about fixing the tire because he's got to have it fixed to drive to work, you see, everything works so much smoother because the emotions aren't as intense.
So I need to work on shrinking that emotional body then.
It shrinks by itself. It's a matter of removing judgment. And most judgment is judgment of self. Most emotion is in regards to one's place in respect to the whole. from which your partner would be part of. And so ego body wants more emotion, stronger emotion, because it's a manifestation of self. It's that Neo principle of victory. And so as one removes judgment, of self, as one begins trusting self, that emotional body shrinks.
Yeah.
You know, don't worry. Excuse me, honey?
Yeah, when you first meet someone new and you're in this wonderful phase of your relationship where everything's running smoothly all the time, is that because you're sort of surrendering yourself to the other person?
No, that's because you're wet all the time.
You know what I'm saying?
Well, it's the same. It's the same with the guy. No. It's like, you know, there's this desire to commune.
Mm-hmm.
And this desire to become one. And the way a relationship forms is when a couple of people get together and go like, oh, yes, I really like this spirit body, this feeling I get around this individual over here. And so one is controlling one's emotions at that level. They're controlling that inside tree. And keep moving it. Keep jumping it up to the pleasant place. Ignoring all the unpleasant places. See, that's like an unconscious control. It's desire. It's yes.
Mm-hmm.
So you're living just in the intelligence of desire.
Mm-hmm.
So you're constantly shifting it up, and you're not paying any attention to these other intelligences that are part of you and your partner. And then, as we become used to each other, we don't pay quite as much attention to that, and they start moving away a little bit, and you go, I can put up with that. That's how it starts. I can put up with that. You see, now, if there are people around me that I know, and all of a sudden I turn around and I see that type of thing in the two emotional bodies, I say, hey, what are you doing to each other? Hey. You know? But it's hard to deal with on a personal level. That's part and parcel of the process. Part and parcel of the process. You know, and you gotta remember that outside tree is moving real slow. And the only control you got is over the inside tree. And what I'm saying is allow the totality of experience is the way to remove judgment and the way to understand that by allowing the experience. And that's why I say, as you recognize conflict, you jump around that goddamn, you push that tree all the way around again, because you can't go backwards. Remember, you can't go backwards. But you just hurry up and push it through all the intelligences to where you catch the thing where it started. And it usually started in one or the other. And when someone has been together even a few years, even if they don't consciously recognize it and work on it, if they were at fault, they pretty much know the first time they push the button. See, and you start again and watch, say, maybe my fault. But then the response was exaggerated, so you go, but that wasn't my fault. And you watch the whole thing develop again. And you'll be surprised, it probably won't happen anymore after that. Probably won't happen anymore after that. You just go all the way around. You're back to the beginning of that goddamn thing, or even a couple of days before. So you can watch the articulation of the emotion. Once you experience the articulation of the emotion consciously, in your conscious mind, not unconscious mind, where you're consciously watching the articulation of the emotion, you're rocking. I mean, next time you start creating something like that, you turn around and you look at your partner and go like, do we want to go there again? And so everything gets solved. The emotion's still there, but all of a sudden it starts solving itself right there instead of waiting for the flare. And the emotional body shrinks. So suddenly you got an emotional body like this, 3 inches instead of 3 foot. So then, when you're real close together, there's no conflict. Even though the emotions are different, there's no push on each other. That's the advantage of it. That's how we do the process in Hermetic. So we're very effective. I don't mean to offend anyone. There's thousands of religions and philosophies and whatnot out there, but we're very effective. But it's hard work. I can't do it for you. Nobody can. You have to do it.
No one can serve self but self.
Correct. I mean, and I encourage everybody to investigate everything. But the process has to be self. It has to begin by trusting self. And in the process of maturing in life, the one thing we do is learn to distrust self. We start separating from self. When we turn around and want to play with the neighbor's toys when we're only 2 years old, when we don't really like the neighbor, see, we're violating self. When we turn around and make believe we like the neighbor just so we can play with the toy, we're violating self. See, that's where you get into this abstract philosophy. I'm going to get a little carried away here. But that's when you get into this abstract philosophy of right and wrong. Is self better off if you give up self and make believe you like that dirty little son of a bitch just so you can use his baseball glove? Or are you being more true to self if you just steal a fucking glove for a couple of days and then throw it back over the fence and let him have it back? Right and wrong.
I'm beige.
When I was a child, I was raised with a carnival, a circus. My mom and dad had 14 children. I was young. We lived in what you would call a travel trailer nowadays. My mom and dad and 14 kids. So once the whole circus was up, a lot of times we'd sleep in the big top or one of the booths, something like that. Just to, the trailer was full.
With 16 people in the trailer, you have to learn how to spend it.
Correct. But we could not, obviously, we could not have many toys. We damn sure couldn't have a bicycle. So I was actually raised with the understanding that it was perfectly okay. Most shows are 10 days, 2 weekends back then. Most of the shows were 10 days. It was perfectly okay to go to town and steal some kid's bicycle. As long as you put it back. But to do that and stay in balance, you had to, and the fences were deliberately built around the lot to allow this. You know, they're portable fences that you put off and come down. You had to tell impoverished children, children in the town, that their parents couldn't afford a bike either, and they damn sure couldn't afford the nickel. You know, back in the 30s, 5 cents was a lot of money. They couldn't afford the nickel to come into the show. So you'd steal this bicycle, and the first thing you did when you stole this bicycle is you'd run through the poor section of town and tell the children how they could get in. That's how you paid for your bike ride.
Mm-hmm.
But then you had to put the bike back. Okay, right or wrong?
There is no right or wrong.
That's correct. But you understand what I'm saying? Now, if you went and took the bike and then just threw it in the bayou when you were done, that's wrong. You got no use for the bike anymore. You went and took it, take it back. You see, you got your 10 days use. So, you know, there's a judgment's a stinker. Judgment is the big movie. It's the big stinker.
Well, I think you see the balance in that because you gave the poor kids the tickets. But
The other kids still didn't have his damn bicycle. I mean, you still denied him the use of his property.
right.
Okay?
Right.
So I'm not trying to justify him. Believe me, when I was a child, I didn't think like this. Even though I was already an adept, I still had to develop an emotional body. The gypsy way is, you know, go borrow a bike. You know. So, you know, by the time you're done dealing with different cultures and different aspects and stuff, it's self. It's self. It's the definition and quality of opine of self. Now, if you feel guilty for borrowing that bicycle and still borrow it, then you're denying self. If it's going to make you feel guilty, you can't do it. Can't do it. It's when you feel guilty about it, when you throw it in the mud when you're done. I never felt guilty. I was borrowing. Goddamn kid probably didn't ride it very often anyway. Particularly while we're in town. I mean, his mom and dad had plenty of money. He had a nickel a day. We didn't allow bikes on the lot. And Midway, you know. So he wasn't going to be riding it anyway. I mean, they were giving him the 50 cents so he could come every day. You know? He was just using his bike while he wasn't interested anyway. He's more interested in going to see if he can look under the tent for the skinny dances and stuff, you know. Or riding on the Ferris wheel. What is that? Okay, so but that's your judgment of self. That's part of accepting self. I noticed that. Very nice.
So with our children, the best thing we can do for them is just teaching them to be true to themselves, really, at this stage in their lives. There's no need to go into any more depth.
That is a very, very rough one, honey. That is a very, very rough one. Philosophically, I would consider that until the end of puberty, a parent's position should require at least an advisory aspect. And assisting them in developing their emotions. If you allow a child to just do what they want with it, and I'm not talking about discipline, I'm talking about without explaining consequence and stuff like that, the child will end up in a shambles and have to learn from others pushing on them or stuff like that. No, tell them to trust self, but describe the consequence.
Mm.
Do you understand what I'm saying? You can't, just because they want the neighbor's butt does not mean they can go take it. I mean, that is not what I said when I was talking earlier. No, parenting is a very, very rough job. It's basically the tacit pillar. One of the problems with parenting is as society develops, the responsibility of parenting got too close together, once again, the emotions. And, dad, back in the old days, women used to, by the time they were done nursing one, they were having another. Mom was pretty responsible until they were big enough to help dad out, herding sheep, or building a house, or whatever the hell was going on. And as society developed and the familial communion developed, suddenly those two emotional bodies were once again intertwining, where dad needed Junior out here and mom needed Junior laying down because he had the flu. Once again, it's the same thing. Things were much more separate and easier back then from a spiritual point of view. But the complexity that has been created in the development of society is necessary, because learning how to balance that part and shrink the emotional body is part and parcel of the overall spiritual growth.
So the trick with parenting is to be able to move ourselves so we're in tune with the kids, so we can experience it and modify it if necessary.
Trust self. And part and parcel of that is trusting self to the point that self is willing to trust your partner.
Uh-huh. Right? Single in now. What do I say? Trust me. Trust me?
No. That's not what I said. That's not what I said.
Guys, it's been great.
Trust her. Trust her to trust self.
Oh, okay.
Like
Both things are the same.
Like the first time, just like you did the first time you looked at her and got an erection.
Fair enough.
Fair enough.